Welcome everyone to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network June webinar. My name is Xiaohan Bao Smith. I'm your moderator today, and we are going to hear about the Charlevoix mushroom houses balancing the impacts of tourism on privately owned homes. Before we get started, I would like to go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, to make sure we can see your questions. So all the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please also put them into the Q&A box. And the chat box will be used to share links and resources discussed during the webinar. And both chat box and the Q&A boxes are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse. And please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. If you're not a member yet, please consider joining us at mhpn.org. Our webinars are supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. It is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speakers. We will be hearing from Lindsay and Trevor Dotson. Lindsay is the DDA Director of City of Charlevoix, and she is also an MHPN board member. And Trevor is the Manager of Operations of Charlevoix Historical Society. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our speakers. And Lindsay and Trevor, please go ahead and sharing your screen.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Always love the awkward transition of screen shares. Does it look good?
Yeah, I can see the screen. So there's a little bit issue here that the PowerPoint is not as big as we want it to be, but we probably can share it with you afterwards if you want a copy.
Yes, and most of the slides are images, so hopefully they will still look as you'll get the idea essentially. So hello again. Thank you for the introduction. So happy to be here with everyone today. My name is Lindsay Dotson. I work for the city of Charlevoix, and I have a couple of roles here. I am the Downtown Development Authority Director, and I also am the staff advisor for the Historic District Commission here in the city. And this person.
I am Trevor Dotson, and as mentioned earlier, I am the Manager of Operations at the Charlevoix Historical Society, which is right down the street from my wife's office.
Yes, and we've been here collectively for about 7.5 years. So Trevor's going to kick us off with a brief intro to Earl Young.
Yes, I'd like to, being with the Historical Society, I would like to at least give a brief introduction or history of Earl Young before we get started into part of the main topic. So the works of Earl A. Young have helped Charlevoix become a city known worldwide, and the phrase Mushroom Houses of Charlevoix is recognized both nationally and internationally, and we've heard so from people that have visited the museum. So every year, the Charlevoix Historical Society Museum at Harsha House welcomes visitors from all over the United States and from abroad who are fascinated by the houses and want to learn more about them and the man who created them, Earl Young. As my coworker and author of Young's biography, David Miles, wrote, quote, Earl's works speak on a subconscious level to people about what an unfettered imagination is capable of accomplishing to express the human relationship to the natural world we live in. However, the popularity of the houses, which seemingly continues to grow every year, has caused dissatisfaction of some of the homeowners and those who live within the neighborhoods. Before discussing how the mushroom houses have positively affected Charlevoix, but also negatively affected some of the community, I would first like to give a brief history. So Earl Young was born in 1889 in Mansalona, Michigan, which is about 30 miles southeast of Charlevoix. His family moved to Charlevoix in 1900, so Earl would have been around 10 or 11. Once in Charlevoix, next slide. Once in Charlevoix, Earl immediately became entranced with the natural beauty, the shores of Lake Michigan, the shores of Lake Charlevoix, the forests, and of course, the stones and the boulders that were along the shores or found in the farmers' fields. Next slide. At some point in his childhood, or as a teenager, Earl decided he wanted to be an architect. And after graduating from high school in 1908, he enrolled at the University of Michigan School of Architecture. However, Earl found the curriculum to not be to his liking. He didn't want to learn about the classical architectural methods of the past. So he dropped out after his first year and returned to Charlevoix, where he worked with his mother at her real estate and insurance business. Next slide. Oh, wait, you can stay on that one for a minute. In 1914, he married his childhood sweetheart, Irene Harsha. And in 1919, with the arrival of their second child on the way, Earl determined it was time for him to begin what he had dreamt about for years. It was time to build his first house. He'd probably never admit it, but he may have been a bit unsure of himself because he hired a Petoskey architect to draw floor plans. However, Earl alone was the one who gathered all the boulders and stones, and he assuredly gave the orders on how the exterior of the house should look. The house was completed in 1920. Several years passed before an opportunity arose for Earl to really cut his teeth at building. He got the opportunity to purchase 33 acres just outside of the city limits. And from 1923 to 1937, he built 10 houses in an area he platted and called Boulder Park. Each house has its own unique design elements and the use of different stone materials or different types of stone and the different use of the stone and how he placed them. And I personally believe he didn't just build 10 houses out there. I believe there's 2 more houses that he may have built that we don't have proof that he built, but from research, I suspect those 2 are also his. From 1938 to 1954, he built, oh, you can go to the next one. From 1938 to 1954, he built 7 houses and remodeled several others in a triangular shaped lot on Park Avenue, in the area where his first home was built. These houses became more unique than his first in Boulder Park and fit in with the topography of the land. That was something that was important to Earl. He wanted the house to fit within the surrounding of where it was going to be built. He would spend time walking the grounds and walking the property before he even got started in thinking about exactly what the house was going to look like. He would want to feel the land, walk on the land, see where the trees were, and then in his mind, he would visualize where he wanted that house to fit on that property. So these houses were up in Park Avenue around where his first house was built, and these houses overlook Lake Michigan. The house around the corner on Grant Street that was built in the 1950s, he actually called the Mushroom House himself, and that is where we get the term mushroom houses from. They all collectively are now known as mushroom houses. Also in the 1950s, he worked on 2 additional homes on Upper Park Avenue. He traveled to the UP to find stones for the one house, and with this house right here, called the Sutcher House, he wanted to give the homeowner a view of 1/3 earth, 1/3 water, and 1/3 sky from the large picture window, which faces Lake Michigan on the opposite side of the house. In the 1950s and 60s, he started to focus on 3 commercial structures: the Weather Vane Restaurant, which is on the left, the Weather Vane Terrace on the top right, and the Weather Vane Lodge, which then later became known as just the Lodge. And even though Earl did not design the Lodge Hotel, he was responsible for the stone implements on the outside, the stone fireplace, and as you can see, he's in the red shirt there supervising the placement of the stone sign. And he also worked on the stone turrets, which you can't really see too well in this photo. And here's some examples of the fireplaces. The fireplace in the left photo is from what was the lodge, which is now Hotel Earl, named after Earl Young, but that is the fireplace that he created. And then the one on the right is from the Weather Vane restaurant. And fun fact, that stone that's in the middle was so heavy that when they first placed it, the floor started sagging. So they had to lift it back out on a crane, and it dangled over the roof for a while until they could shore up the floor to lower it back in. The last three houses Earl built were between 1967 and 1973 on a private road on the north shore of Round Lake. Earl worked all the way up until his death, but the last thing that he did before calling it a career, he placed a large boulder at the entrance to Boulder Park and put the words Boulder Park on the outside of it. That is something he had wanted to do and did later in his life. Earl passed away in 1975 and is buried in Charlevoix, and his headstone appropriately is a large boulder. Some of Earl's legacy, his daughter Virginia followed in his footsteps, and she also built some homes here in Charlevoix. So here are three of the homes that his daughter Virginia built. She didn't use stone as much on the exterior, but all the homes do have stone fireplaces. I think she was kind of more interested in some what we might call like English architecture. What's the word I'm going for there?
Well, it's like a cottage.
Yeah, English cottage.
Yeah.
But you can see she went with the same type of roofs that her father did. And Earl's legacy also lives on in areas of Charlevoix. When Charlevoix decided to redo East Park, which is right along Round Lake, they kind of paid homage to Earl by making all the fence work and the band shell made out of cut stone. So that's a little background on Earl Young. And the Charlevoix Historical Society is probably one of the four main entities that promote the mushroom houses. The other three being mushroomhousetours.com, which Lindsay will talk about later, and then of course the DDA, and then Visit Charlevoix, which is the tourism bureau basically. So what has the Charlevoix Historical Society done over the years to promote the mushroom houses? The first thing that the Charlevoix Historical Society did was back in the early 2000s, a group approached my coworker, David Miles, and asked him if he would be interested in giving them a guided walking tour of the homes. And David had never done a guided walking tour of them before, but he agreed to do this walking tour. And after doing the walking tour, the people liked it so much that David had the idea to ask the board, the Historical Society board, if this is something that they would like to do to generate interest and generate revenue. So it kind of just happened out of circumstance that the Charlevoix Historical Society started doing walking tours of the home. And they had been doing walking tours for a while outside of a business on Bridge Street, which is the main drag where the businesses are. And that was working quite well, but unfortunately that business burned down in a fire. And since then we've been running the walking tours out of the Historical Society by request. So word spread quickly that the Historical Society was giving walking tours, and in around 2005, people who run large coach bus companies started asking David if he would step onto the coach bus and provide a tour from the bus itself. So the bus would drive by the houses, David would have a microphone and give a lecture on the history of the houses as the buses went by. So he agreed to do this, and from that, we brought on more guides that would be able to do these tours as well. So they learn the history, and together, these guides will step on a coach bus and provide tours. And that's been going on since roughly around 2005. And our peak year was in 2018 when this Historical Society did over 80 coach bus tours. If you can imagine the impact that 80 coach buses had over the course of the summer and into the early fall. So in 2009, the Society produced a DVD titled The Life and Works of Earl Young, and also photographer Mike Barton created a book called The Mushroom Houses of Charlevoix. And both of those books, or that book and that DVD, sold very well, and Mike Barton's book is sold all over the United States and has brought a lot of attention to the mushroom houses to people who may not have even traveled to this area before knowing about them. The historical site also created this little $5 booklet, which is on the right here. And this booklet is intended to give people who do not want to pay for a guided tour or do not want to take one of the mushroomhousetour.com tours. This booklet allows them to do their own self-driving tour. And we probably sell around 150 of these booklets each year. So that's an additional 150 people going around, driving by the houses, walking by the houses. And that's just the people that come to the museum to get the booklet. I mean, who knows how many other people are just driving and walking by on their own. So because of the increased bus traffic and because of the increased traffic that we've had since selling these booklets, which we've been selling since around 2010, the Historical Society determined that we needed to do something to let people know that these are private residences and that they cannot walk up to the residences, they cannot try and go in the residences or inside the houses. So within the booklet, we made edits to it that said, please be respectful of the homeowners. You must stay off the lawn, stay on the road or on the sidewalk across the street. When in Boulder Park, do not go up on the lawns, do not approach the houses. Terminology such as that has now been put into these booklets, which was not there originally. And we also put that terminology in the free brochures that we hand out. So the popularity of Earl Young and the Mushroom House has continued to grow. And in 2015, Bonamy Filmworks out of Rogers City approached the Historical Society to be a partner and a historical research resource for their proposed DVD and film on Earl Young and the Mushroom Houses. So the film was made. It was called The Wizard of Boulder Park, and it premiered here in Charlevoix in 2015. And in 2016, it was a Michigan Regional Emmy winner in the historic documentary category. So because we were one of the historic because we were the main resource for historical information and helped promote the DVD, the museum was able to get an Emmy as well. So that brought even more recognition to the area. In 2018, the Historical Society decided to talk a little bit about Earl's other half, his wife Irene, because his wife Irene was also essential in the creation of the mushroom houses. So because Earl dropped out of architecture school, he was never an actual trained and licensed architect. And he often had to express to the people that were building the houses, the builders, the stonemasons, he had to express to them what he wanted the house to look like. And you can imagine how difficult that would be to somebody to just try and visualize somebody else's thoughts. So the story from the family is that Irene would often sketch Earl's ideas as floor plans or sketch his ideas on paper and provide those to the builders so they would have an idea of what the house should look like shape-wise and what Earl might be thinking. And that's a version of one of her floor plans on the left there. So in 2018, we wanted to talk a little bit more about Irene and how she helped Earl Young with his process in building these homes and her influence on these homes, and not just the homes, but the city of Charlevoix altogether, as she was a local artist and helped out with getting the Charlevoix Waterfront Art Fair started. And then moving on in 2019, one day the Historical Society was discussing merchandise and other ideas, and we had the idea that nobody has ever written a biography on Earl Young. So the Charlevoix Historical Society took it upon ourselves to be the ones to write the biography, because we have been doing all these histories and tours and exhibits for years now, so we should be the ones to do it. So my coworker David Miles, who is an author, took the reins, and myself and a group of other editors all worked on the book, and the book has since won the Library of Michigan 2021 Notable Book Award, one of the 20 books to win that year, and has also received the Historical Society of Michigan State History Award for documentary category. And to date, we have sold almost 1,200 copies of the book, and it's currently in its third printing. So as I may have mentioned earlier, Boulder Park is located just outside of the city limits, And Boulder Park was designed with very tight, narrow streets. Earl Young wanted the area to be kind of meandering. He didn't like the rudimental layouts of just like rectangular blocks and rectangular lots. So Boulder Park has some tight roads that are winding and meandering. And because of this, those large coach tour buses that the Historical Society used to take through there, around 2021, we determined that it'd be best to keep the large buses out of Boulder Park on the tight roads. So, with this idea in mind, we sent letters to every single homeowner and property owner in Boulder Park expressing how these tours are important to the community because these buses bring in lots of people who sometimes stay in the community and spend their money downtown and spend their money at other places in the area. So we expressed to them the importance of these tours to Charlevoix and to the Charlevoix Historical Society, but also told them that we will respect their privacy more now by not bringing the buses into Boulder Park. So now the buses go by the outskirts of Boulder Park and then loop around and go back. And it was nice that I received 2 letters and 1 phone call back from residents who were very appreciative that we had sent them those letters, stating that it's important to us in the community that we continue the tours, but we'll respect your privacy as best we can.
Oh, I forgot to get rid of that one. Sorry.
Oh,
Keep
well,
going.
this is a slide I wasn't expecting. So
Sorry.
we'll keep going.
All right.
The last couple of things that I was going to talk about, other than the letter that we sent out, we've also we've been cognizant of complaints about the buses taking up parking spots also, and we've worked to find different areas for buses to park if they're going to stay downtown. We've also made recommendations on where the buses can go. And one other thing is, if anybody ever has any problems, we always ask them to come to us because we know people in Boulder Park have gone to the township board and made complaints about the constant flow of people coming through their neighborhoods, and it's to be expected. And one other thing I'll mention is that with the popularity of Earl Young and the Mushroom Houses, the Society will focus its next feature exhibit, which will open in 2026 at the museum, will cover Earl Young and his mushroom houses. And we're also currently working on getting his manuscript that he never had published. We're working on editing that, finding good photos to add along to what he already has, and we plan to hopefully publish his manuscript sometime in 2026 or 27.
So, Trevor already mentioned some of the ways Earl's work has continued to impact our community and definitely had an influence on design in more than one way. Not only are a lot of our public spaces designed with stonework to emulate kind of the vibe that he was going for, but private businesses and properties have also over the years consistently kind of kept up with making things, at least even if it's just a veneer, having that stone presence and the boulder presence, just kind of all over the place. So it, even though he only built a handful of structures in the grand scheme of things, well,
he built over 33.
Well, I'm saying, like, okay, if this is a larger place, yeah, then that doesn't seem like a lot. The ripple effect of the work that he did is far reaching, and it has essentially established a theme, an unofficial theme, if you start to pay attention to the intricacies of the design of things in Charlevoix. But I will also mention, and I didn't necessarily create a slide on this, that he wasn't necessarily the first person to use stone to build something grand, like, I don't know, a place that we now call Castle Farms, which started out as essentially Loeb Farms. And if you've been there or heard of the place, sorry, I don't have a photo. It was built. It's a giant show 1916. Sorry, Mr. Historian.
Oh.
But it was built as a essentially a show farm, a dairy, and a way. It was very grandiose on purpose, essentially, but it's built entirely of stone, and that predates some of the work that Earl Young started to do here in Charlevoix, which most definitely probably influenced some of the choices that he made going forward with some of the work that he did. And obviously, using what plentiful natural resources we have, which apparently is a lot of rock.
And Earl almost assuredly used some of the stonemasons that worked on castle farms that were still in the area. He almost assuredly contacted them to assist with building some of his early houses.
So, as the popularity of these homes started to increase, and it kind of almost perfectly aligns with the release of the documentary, and like the start of more tours that are being conducted and or just being done on their own. The interest in these houses essentially translated into the property values going up and people purchasing them to essentially use them as vacation rentals for income. And one major change that happened in around this time frame was that original home that Earl had built was very much altered into what we see today and refer to as the thatch house. And it in and of itself is a spectacle, and probably gets photographed just as much, if not more, than all the other homes. However, it was the last straw for the community because they saw the possibility of these privately owned homes that were starting to mean so much more to Charlevoix and its economy and tourism. And the possibilities of what drastic change could occur. This wasn't a complete demolition. You can still see that the original home is there, but the second floor addition, along with the thatch roof, was obviously a dramatic change. And so this is what started the process of the community actually pursuing the establishment of the local historic district. And oh, go ahead.
I just want to interject one thing. So in 1994, one of Earl's last three houses that he built, it was one of the three that was on the north shore of Round Lake. In 1994, somebody purchased one of the three houses and actually just demolished it. And that caused a little bit of a stir in the community. It was a very unique shaped house. It was like basically if you took three circles and kind of put them together in a certain fashion, and it was all stone clad on the outside. But the person thought it was either too oddly designed or too small, and they tore the whole thing down. And that was kind of the first little realization that, hey, these are special and we need to protect them. But then, many years later, this house happened and that really kicked it off.
Right. And his real estate office downtown is no longer. And so that was another structure that was lost and replaced with more density.
One other house on Round Lake was also heavily altered as well. Like the original house was basically surrounded by more house, new house. But the person who did it at least built that out of stone.
So here is just an aerial to give you an idea of what our very small historic district consists of. It's essentially the triangle of Park Avenue, which you've heard, Grant Street, and Clinton Street. And the reason why I mention this, and Trevor already touched on it, is that it does not include the Boulder Park neighborhood.
Nor does it include the two houses that are on Upper Park Avenue.
Or any of the commercial properties. But good news on that front in a little bit. So Trevor briefly mentioned the Mushroom House tours, and essentially Edith Pear, she is a local, born and raised, and an artist, and she had this idea kind of it was very organic, the same way the tour started with the historical society, um, and I believe she started with walking tours as well, of just informing the general public on, you know, the whimsy that these homes really kind of present that you don't find anywhere else. And she took an idea that was essentially, she didn't even have a brick and mortar business at the time, or a building, I should say. She kind of grew to having more than one gem car. So essentially, what you do is you go on her website, you book yourself a tour, you and your party of various sizes, up to, I believe, 7 or 8 can fit into one of them. Get to take a little ride around town in a gem car and hear all about the history of the homes. And they do sprinkle in other fun facts as well along the way. And of course, the scenery is beautiful and they're affordable tours. And so she hit the jackpot as far as a business model is concerned. And so she grew rapidly and went from giving a handful of tours to needing an actual space where people would go to sign up and wait for the next tour to happen. And so she operated out of some downtown businesses, much like the Historical Society kind of did for a little bit. Her longest stint was out of Elements Gallery, and then within the last couple of years, she's gotten to the point where she needs her own space, and so she grew into a brick and mortar location and now has a gift shop affiliated with her business, where her as an artist, she gets to create in the winter while she's not giving tours. And so she gets to sell original merchandise that she's created and other kind of keepsakes that are related to Earl Young and the mushroom homes. And she's also contributed greatly to the general community by way of um, like those little standy cutout things. Like there's a mushroom, like gnomes and mushrooms and various ones that she's made that are kind of sprinkled throughout town that people just love and take photos in all the time. And so the interesting challenge, of course, even though these gem cars are small, the groups of people are small. They're still going into the neighborhood Boulder Park with those small streets. And even though it's a much smaller vehicle versus a giant tour bus, um, the residents are still feeling a little uncomfortable because the homes are so close to the road that even though this small gem car is out there and someone's talking to the passengers on a microphone, they're literally in your front yard almost. And so it has created this level of discomfort that Edith has been trying to manage while her business has grown over the years. And there are various ways that she's been doing that. And we'll get into some of the other issues that have occurred because of the general busyness. So we, when this was in 2019, I believe, we installed historic district signage to just mark the boundaries. And because we had to essentially account for the fact that not everyone is going to have the little $5 booklet that Trevor talked about that reminds people that these homes are privately owned, to put it out in more of a public way to respect that these homes are privately owned. There still are instances of folks going up on the grass and taking pictures with houses. My parents happen to rent one every once in a while, and it's really strange because you feel like you're a spectacle when you're inside of it. But thankfully, the signs have maybe improved behavior a little bit. At least it's getting the message out there in a more universal way. And so that was one way that we were hoping to improve the situation for the people that live and or are staying there. So back to Boulder Park and mentioning that they are not in the city, therefore not in the historic district. Some of the signage efforts that that have occurred over the last handful of years include wayfinding signs that direct people to various interest points in Charlevoix, which of course include the mushroom homes, which of course also point people back to Boulder Park. Um, and then essentially, yeah. So we're the ones that installed those signs. And at some point, someone called and said, "Hey, we really appreciate the whole wayfinding thing, but also you're just making it busier back here by showing people how to get back here," as if they weren't figuring it out on their own. But that was kind of a wake up call for us, because we didn't think that far ahead when we were doing the signage. And so essentially, one of the signs that continue to point people toward Boulder Park, that was close to the hospital, we actually removed that one after several requests, as a way to try to make nice and fix some of the, I guess, mistake that had occurred when we initially planned out the verbiage on the signs. And another thing about signs is that when we installed the boundary signs for the historic district in town, the folks in Boulder Park started to call and ask us, "Well, why can we get some of those?" And I said, "Sure, you can call your local government and ask them about that, because that's out of our jurisdiction." And that's when the conversation about the potential of making the roads in that area private started, essentially. I'm sure it probably had happened before then, but it became more of a public topic around that time. And so the residents of Boulder Park are possibly trying to do that. I don't know the current status of it, but it would greatly reduce the amount of traffic that goes into the neighborhoods. In the worst case, if that were to move forward, people can still see a good number of the homes from the Lakeshore Drive area. And so hopefully that won't reduce the excitement overall about the homes.
I believe in March, some of the homeowners went to the Charlevoix Township Board to discuss, issues that they're having with the tours, and to again discuss the idea of making the roads private. It was sometime earlier this year, because I remember I heard from one of the homeowners.
Right. So another thing that what happened recently and was a big ticket item for the city of Charlevoix, and I kind of skipped over another topic that also perpetuated the historic district conversation. As Trevor mentioned, all of these homes on Park Avenue are facing Lake Michigan, and so the view is or maybe at one point when we were more deforested than we are now, you did have a pretty good water view. But over time, vegetation has grown up, and there's a beautiful park along Park Avenue, hence the name, and across from the homes. And when the thatch house started to change, there was kind of a push and pull for people that owned the homes who still wanted that water view, and the city who was trying to protect the natural landscape. And so that kind of created some issues as far as the sight line and what people were entitled to, essentially. And I won't get into details because it got a little messy, unfortunately. But one of the good things that came from it many years later is the work that was done along Park Avenue the last couple of years, which essentially the photo on the left, you can see it used to just be kind of a normal street, and the shoulder was dirt, and probably more so created the shoulder was created by the traffic that would inevitably pull over so that they could take pictures of the homes. And so instead of just allowing, I mean, it created congestion. There's people walking in the road, paying no mind to the fact that it's an actual street that people are driving on, usually trying to get to and from the hospital. So, there were a lot of hazards and speeding issues and things like that. And so the picture on the right is, I literally took that this morning. It's showing where we widened many parts of Park Avenue. We added some parking spots, as you see there. We just widened the shoulders and actually paved them. So that's more of an official spot for people to pull over versus stopping in the middle of the road. We've added pedestrian crosswalk signage. There was a stop sign added at an intersection to slow traffic down, and a new path to help people navigate the park system that is still there. What and not having to kind of juggle the masses that are there just to see the mushroom houses. And you have something to say, so go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that the work that they did with expanding that shoulder area definitely helps with the bus tours that we do, because that gives a spot, usually gives a spot for the bus to pull over, because not every spot is filled. So the bus usually has enough space where they can pull over and get out of the way of the road and not feel real pressured to quickly go by. And the one other thing I wanted to point out, if you look at the photo on the left, or the previous photo, and you look at the van that's parked out front of the house, even though these houses are mainly built during the time of the automobile, very, very few of the houses have garages. So the people who are vacationing or living in the houses along Park Avenue right there, they have to park along Park Avenue, just out front of the houses. So without making that expanded parking area or shoulder area, some people that were looking at the houses would pull up into these people's parking areas, which wasn't necessarily designated their parking area, but it makes it more difficult if you're trying to live in the house and or rent the house out, when you have to say, oh, good luck with parking, because somebody might take up the whole block.
Another note on the buses. So Trevor gave a number of their peak year of 80 bus tours. And that is only a number that the Historical Society can measure, aka those are the number of tours they gave on buses, but it is not the amount of buses that came to town, because there are plenty of other group tours that come through Charlevoix and just take it upon themselves to give themselves a tour without booking the service through the Historical Society. So that number is probably just a portion of the chaos that occurs.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was one of the other reasons why we sent the letter to the residents in Boulder Park. Because also within that letter, we stated that there are some large buses that are going to continue to come through your tight streets. And we wanted to let them know that we were no longer going to do that. So if any bus did go through the tight street, it was unaffiliated with us. And hopefully they wouldn't call us to complain.
So, essentially in Charlevoix, because we've been a tourist destination for over 100 years at this point, there is that draw in the summertime that kind of increases the demand on the resources that we have, including lodging. And so, as I mentioned, with the home in 2015 that was converted to really essentially be a vacation rental, many of the Earl Young homes have since become vacation rentals. But there still are some that are occupied by the owners and or are second homes that of the people that own the properties. And so it's interesting, because maybe it wouldn't be as much of an issue if all of the mushroom homes were vacation rentals, because if people are on vacation, it's kind of like, well, I only have to deal with this for a few days versus it being a perpetual problem.
And if you did your homework ahead of time, you'd probably realize that you're going to be a spectacle if you're in a house that is that popular.
Right. It's kind of fun, actually. Like, my parents and I have fun with it. because you can do silly things and when people are outside taking pictures and hope that it makes it in the picture. So I'm sure there are positives, but it's also probably extremely annoying. Um, so thankfully, with our state historic tax credit being reinstated, um, some of the homes that have just aged appropriately are hopefully going to be able to take advantage of some of the preservation incentives that are made available to them. Of course, only the homes that are not being used as vacation rentals, because that does exclude them from being eligible for applying for tax credits. But this is thankfully another tool that I'm trying to use as a way of the city saying, hi, this is a resource that is now available to you. Sorry about all of the things that have been happening. um, let us help you with the application process so that you can get some kickback for maintaining and still cherishing this really unique, special place. So that's been positive. We've sent letters out to all the property owners and gotten a lot of interest back. And so hopefully a good handful of people will be able to take advantage of those incentives. And for the sake of time, since we only have 10 minutes left, that's it. It is now time for questions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lindsay and Trevor, for this wonderful presentation. And this is really nice to look at all the photos and listen to what struggles you had and your solutions. I think it's very helpful to everybody who's listening. And let's go to our Q&A section right now. We do have quite a few questions here, and I will start with the first one. Okay, so some of them I think you have already answered in your presentation. Okay, the first question is, do the homeowners of the mushroom houses have difficulty finding contractors and craftspeople who can work on these buildings?
Yes. That's underlined like 30 times. That it's always been an issue. Once upon a time, there were plenty of stonemasons in the area, as seen by the things that they created here, but that that has
Trade.
the trade has not been maintained. Like for some reason, it didn't get passed down to other generations, and so um, we have struggled just because of the fact that we're in a rural area to find talent in the trades at all. And just generally speaking, don't have a population base that supports like a lot of these trade type of jobs and positions. And so, yeah, it's always been a struggle. Oh, we use the MHPN resource directory all the time. And we have had some workshops up here as well to help homeowners learn a bit about what they could potentially do on their own. But yeah, it's always been a struggle, and it got worse, of course, after the pandemic when people started to come and build new houses and big projects get priority over small maintenance type projects. And so, yeah, the answer to the question is a resounding yes. It is hard.
Okay. Okay, so next question. A tourist comes to the hospital before going around to get to the Boulder Park. So does the hospital have issues with having so many people around?
That's a good question. I don't think so.
I haven't heard anybody from the hospital ever mention that they've had any issues with the traffic going down to Boulder Park. But the one good thing is that, so there's Park Avenue, which goes by the hospital that leads down to Boulder Park. But the ambulances take a different street, which is called Antrim Street. And the ambulances generally take that street to go straight to the emergency department or to the hospital. And maybe they did that because of the fact that, you know, they'll have more difficulty going down Park Avenue, but that's the route that they take. And anybody that like is trying to visit the hospital, I mean, it's kind of a, I haven't heard anybody mention it before. The hospital has a big enough parking lot and good signage, and it's not very big, so it's easy to figure out where to go once you're there.
Mhm.
And I would hope that most people that are that live in the area know that they can take two other alternate streets to get there aside from Park Avenue.
Yeah, it's not the only means of getting to that spot. So,
Okay. Next question. Is there any added security in Boulder Park?
no.
No, there is no security out there. The residents had took it upon themselves to put up their own signs, like they're, you know, the like the signs that you see when people are running for office. They sit on the lawns. Like they have signs that are about that size that basically say they're trying to say with their signs, please stay out. Not even like please be respectful. They're basically saying please don't come in here. And I've seen those signs up every once in a while. I have not seen them up yet this year. Um, so,
Okay.
but there's no security out there.
Okay. Do you know if there's much turnover of the ownership in Boulder Park?
Do you want to talk about that or me?
It's that's a mixed answer, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you can start and then I'll fill in.
Well, I feel like so we've been up here for about 7.5 years, and I feel in that 7.5 years I have heard of multiple homes either built by Earl Young or even the ones built by Virginia changing hands. Multiple homes, and it may not be just because of the amount of people going by them, but I think what happened was we may have just have moved up here at a point in time where some of these people who have owned the homes for a long time were ready to move on.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just happened to be up here at that time because some of them were long-time homeowners,
Yeah,
and they just determined it was time to sell for whatever reason. But there were a couple that owned, I know of one specifically who probably only owned one of the homes for maybe 3 years and then sold it.
yeah. But we do still have a number that are owned by the same people, that essentially have owned them for a good couple of decades at least.
The one of them in the photos said the Colonels. The
Mhm.
Colonels have lived in, like, I shouldn't probably say their name out loud, but I
Well,
just did. It was on the rock. It was on the rock in front of the house. But the Colonels have lived in Boulder Park for a very long time.
yeah, and the Mushroom House, which what it used to have like its original person living in it. Unfortunately, she passed away recently. That was for sale by the family, but it didn't sell. And there was an issue because there's two structures on the property. The city wouldn't let them split the lots, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, the good thing is that the family's keeping it and the daughter has moved in. And so it's remaining in the same family. She grew up there, and that's just fantastic. And so, yeah, it's a mix for sure.
And they're doing some nice landscaping work as we speak.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think there's also questions earlier in the Q&A about the renting mushroom houses. I mean, yes, and you have talked about that. So
Yeah. If you're interested in staying in one, just go on Airbnb or Verbo and you will find the listings.
there's even mushroomhouses.com, or at least it used to exist, and that was to rent the one with the thatch roof or the apple core cottage, which was built by Earl Young's daughter, Virginia.
oh, okay. And I think that's the last question. So could you talk more about the rolled eaves on some of the roofs? Like it's really unique and probably very difficult to maintain.
The roof, you said?
Yeah, the rolled eaves on the
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, a lot of the most of them when they were originally built had shakes, right? And over time, of course, yes, maintenance issues arise with that type of roof material. There are a good number of homes that now have just shingles And so they don't necessarily look exactly the way they did when they were built. But we still have a few that have shakes.
There are some that have like cedar shakes for the roof, and the mushroom house is one of them, and that will cost a fortune if they re-roof it the way that it is now. And one of them I think put a metal roof on, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And getting back to the thatch roof, like it's not the best climate or environment being so close to the water to have a thatch roof, and the thatch roof has had to be repaired several times already. And that roof was apparently put on by a specialist from Ireland. So I assume that they either called the same person back to repair it or found somebody who is just as qualified as that original roofer. But one other side note, Earl did put a thatch roof on one of his original houses, but that thatch roof did not hold up to the climate very well, and the original owners of that house had it removed. So he tried thatch and it didn't work then, and it's not working very well now.
So there's definitely, everyone kind of connects the, that English feel, like country cottage. Yeah. And obviously that's why the thatch roof was a thing that happened, but
and it looks like a mushroom.
That too. But clearly, aesthetic is, it only goes so far. It is not technically functional with our really long, cold winters, almost constant wind because they're right on the lake shore. Even when it's summertime, there's a good breeze here, and that's the reason why people vacation to Charlevoix. So.
Hey, I think we have answered all the questions. And thank you, Lindsay and Trevor, again for your time and your presentation. This is really great. And just a reminder to everybody, this webinar is being recorded and you will receive an email when the recording is available in the next few days. And before we say goodbye, I would like to quickly announce our July webinar, which is scheduled for July 25th at 1 p.m. And it's a moving story of the Dearborn houses. And I hope to see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.